Welcome to the Podkey Summary of Accessibility Technologies Group Lab from WWDC 2026. This week's roundup is full of accessibility updates that feel practical in the best way. There's a lot here for blind and low vision users, for people who use voice, switch, eye, or head input, and for developers who need a clearer path to building things that actually work. The big theme is that Apple seems to be making accessibility both more visible to users and a little less mysterious for teams trying to ship it well. One of the nicest quality of life updates is built-in AI image descriptions right inside VoiceOver. Instead of sharing a photo out to some separate AI service and waiting for a response, a user can use a custom VoiceOver action, swipe up, double tap, and get a generated caption right there in the Photos app. That sounds small until you picture the old workflow. Anytime you remove steps like exporting, switching apps, and coming back, you're not just saving time, you're making the experience feel native and trustworthy. There's also an important developer wrinkle here. If an app removes the image trait and supplies its own accessibility label, it can suppress the system-generated description and have only the custom label spoken. That can be useful when the app already knows exactly what the image is, but it comes with a trade-off. You also take away the user's ability to ask for extra AI-generated detail, which could matter a lot for artwork, diagrams, or any visual that needs more than a short label. Another set of updates is about helping people understand what's happening around them, not just what's on a screen. iOS 27 adds vehicle motion cues with haptic and auditory feedback about how a vehicle is moving. For users with visual impairments, that can improve situational awareness in a really direct way. And when that gets paired with Vision Pro's spatial audio, those motion cues can feel immersive instead of abstract. Direction matters, especially in mixed reality, and spatialized sound gives that movement a location in space instead of just turning it into a generic alert. On the voice side, voice control is getting more natural language understanding with on-device AI. So instead of memorizing exact command phrases, users can describe an on-screen element in everyday language. That lowers the learning curve a lot. It also helps more than one group, because strong voice control tends to benefit switch users and dictation users too. Better speech interaction usually doesn't stay in one lane for long. Apple is also broadening the menu of hands-free and low-hand use interaction options. That includes voice control, head tracking, on-device eye tracking, switch control, and touch accommodations for people with limb differences, mobility limitations, or even temporary injuries. A useful detail here is the new touch accommodation setup flow, which adds a calibration step and suggests settings during onboarding. That kind of setup help matters, because accessibility features can be powerful and still be frustrating if the first run feels like guesswork. If the system can guide someone towards settings that fit conditions like Parkinson's disease, that's a real improvement. And on Vision OS, eye gaze is not the only game in town. There are head-based, finger-based, and wrist-based pointer controls too, which means users aren't forced into one interaction model if gaze isn't comfortable or reliable for them. There's also an API for making reality content accessible, which is essential if spatial computing is going to be more than a very shiny demo for a narrow slice of people. A couple of the updates are especially important for cognitive accessibility. Guided access still does a very specific and very useful job by locking the device to a single app, so a user can stay inside a safe environment without accidentally wandering somewhere confusing or disruptive. Assistive access goes further by redesigning parts of the interface with bigger icons, larger text, and simplified controls. The Apple TV app was one example, and it shows how reducing complexity can make core tasks much easier for neurodivergent users. This is the kind of accessibility work that doesn't always get the spotlight, but for the people who need it, it can completely change whether a device feels manageable or exhausting. For developers, one of the clearest pieces of advice was to start with VoiceOver testing, if time and resources are limited. The reason is pretty simple. A lot of assistive technologies rely on the same accessibility element APIs. So if the app works well with VoiceOver, there's a good chance you've also covered meaningful ground for switch control and voice control. It's the best bang for the buck, especially for smaller teams that can't run a huge testing matrix every sprint. That doesn't mean one size fits all. Cross-platform accessibility still has real differences. On the Mac, users expect richer keyboard shortcuts and more hierarchical grouping. On iOS, navigation is more linear, and hit testing matters more. So the accessibility structure has to fit the platform instead of being copied over and hope for the best. That's one of those unglamorous truths that saves everyone pain later. The tooling story is getting stronger too. And honestly, that's how a lot of accessibility progress becomes sustainable instead of heroic. XCTest UI tests can already fail automatically when the accessibility hierarchy is broken, which helps catch regressions before they reach users. There's also a new VoiceOver-driven testing API that can navigate elements programmatically and verify spoken output, giving teams a smoke test for critical flows instead of relying only on manual checks. A related addition is a new XCTest API that lets developers drive VoiceOver on physical iOS devices from a Mac. The team expects it may work in the iOS simulator too, but it's early, still beta, and they're encouraging detailed feedback on the forums if people hit bugs. In SwiftUI, the accessibility representation modifier is another useful piece. Developers can hide a visually complex control and expose a cleaner accessibility hierarchy instead, even turning one visual element into multiple accessible actions. That's especially helpful for custom controls, including AppKit-style cases where hover behavior or layered UI needs to be translated into custom actions or separate accessibility children. And then there's Xcode itself. Terminal accessibility in iOS 27 gets better VoiceOver support, including moving to the start of a line, reading autocomplete suggestions, and handling special characters more cleanly. Apple is also adding AI-powered Xcode assistants that can inspect code for VoiceOver and dynamic text issues and suggest fixes inline. If that works well, it could make accessibility review feel less like a specialized dark art and more like part of normal development. A few updates are about making accessibility more visible before a person even opens an app. App Store accessibility nutrition labels are a big one. They show whether an app supports things like VoiceOver and dynamic type before download, which gives users more confidence and helps them avoid wasting time on apps that simply won't work for them. For developers, those labels also create a kind of public checklist and a marketing badge at the same time. Accessibility stops being hidden work and starts becoming a visible competitive advantage. Dynamic type is also expanding to tvOS, with support for large text layouts on television screens and a new session focused on large text for tvOS. That pushes designers toward flexible layouts that can hold up at accessibility sizes, which is already standard thinking on iPhone and iPad, but hasn't always been treated as seriously on the TV. It's a good reminder that a couch is not a microscope. If the text can scale gracefully across the room, everyone wins a little. Taken together, these updates point in a pretty healthy direction. Fewer workarounds for users, better defaults for developers, and more visibility around what accessible software actually looks like. There's still plenty that depends on real testing and careful implementation, but the path is getting clearer. And in accessibility, clearer paths are kind of the whole point. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.